Hey friends, just a quick note before the show begins. Due to some tax and finance changes, we have to start a new Patreon page for the show. If you go to patreon.com/DCL_podcast, you'll be able to find the new page. It will eventually go back to the old /DCL podcast. For those that already support the show, we greatly appreciate your continued support. And if you weren't already a member, now is a great time to join our wonderful community of cruisers. Now, on to the show.
Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL Podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly.
Let's have some fun. Well, welcome back to the DCL Podcast, your podcast to help you travel a little smarter. And I'd like to welcome back to the show all the way down in Florida, although she's going to have a little bit of a tough time, so if you bear with us today. How you doing today, Christy?
I am very squeaky. And sometimes the voice doesn't come out at all, but I am here and I am so excited about this episode and I'm excited to record with you.
I am excited to record with you too, although I just saw you for breakfast or lunch, I guess, the other day, just a couple days ago, it seemed like. So I will be doing, I guess, as much talking as I can, but besides our guest, who I love that he is coming back onto the podcast. But before we do that, we got to talk about the weather for Joe Chung.
Yeah.
How's the weather down there?
It's cold everywhere. It's going to be cold for this will go up way after maybe these weekends, but the marathon weekend is starting soon and it's going to be cold. And then Disneyland half marathon weekend is in a week and it's going to be cold.
So iguanas may be falling out of the trees, but I do like it when it's a little bit cooler when you're running those marathons, at least.
Yeah, but waiting in that corral, like when it's 43 degrees, that's chilly.
Yeah, well, there's your weather report, Joe, for Disneyland and Disney World. That's it'll be a couple weeks old by the time you listen to it, but
even
as
better.
Always, yeah. Thanks for laughing along with us, Joe. So let's go to someplace just a little bit warmer. Although our guest is not in a place warmer anymore, I'd like to welcome back to the show all the way out in Colorado. How you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing great, thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much for coming back on. I do appreciate all the support you've given our podcast over the years, and I know that Christy and I are super excited to talk to you about this episode.
Yeah, I am as well. It was really a trip of a lifetime for us. So
trip of a lifetime. Where did you go and why did you book this trip? Why did you and your beautiful wife book this trip?
So we did the Trans-Pacific cruise from Honolulu to Sydney, Australia. First time for Disney Cruise Line. And then we did the 3-night Adventures by Disney add-on afterwards. And that was a totally new experience for us. This was our 10th Disney cruise, but first ABD. So we were really excited to try it and really had no idea going into it what all would be involved.
So a lot of first-time ABDs shows coming out here, Christy. I know your show will be out soon, or if it has not shown already from your travels over in Europe.
ABD really knows what they're doing, and I can't wait to talk about like the Sydney portion. I can't wait to share with the listeners my river cruise portion. And then, Steve, you're going to do an ABD, and we'll hear about that in the spring. So it really is a special product.
We are excited to do our Costa Rica ABD, which we're going to be doing over spring break. But just like you, Tim, we've heard about this product for so long and then finally get to experience. I'm really excited to kind of hear your thoughts on it. Before we jump into it, just for context, we're mostly going to talk about this ABD. It's a 3-day escape to Sydney. But before that, you did the Trans-Pacific cruise all the way from Honolulu down to Sydney. That show you can catch over on the DCL Dude, episode 147, November 19th. So go over to the DCL Dude podcast and you can catch all of the ins and outs of your Trans-Pacific cruise. But I thought we'd just touch on it real briefly. What was your overall thoughts about being on the Wonder that long and traveling across the Trans-Pacific, across the Pacific?
It was by far our best cruise. We had perfect weather, lots of sea days. There were only 3 port days in there. In the 13 nights. The people were fantastic. The Wonder's our favorite ship. So, for whatever reason, the cast members on it are really special. Everyone was excited because it was the first time for almost everyone, though there were a lot of people, a big percentage from Australia on the cruise. That made it a lot of entertaining as they were, only had to go to Hawaii and then back home versus all of us from America were going, first had to get to Hawaii and then trip to Australia and then the very long flight back home. Everyone was doing, or almost everyone that we talked to from America was doing something, spending many days to weeks in Australia and New Zealand afterwards. The cast members were all excited to go. Cruise director was from Australia, so he was, of course, overjoyed at finally, being able to go back, letting everyone know about everything whenever he could. So it was great.
We had Lauren on, and she talked about some of the experiences that they had on board as far as, kind of informational sessions in Australia, the country itself. And then she also talked about crossing the equator. Did you get to partake in the party that crosses the equator?
Absolutely. That turned out to be a lot of fun night. Initially, the plan was, I think they were scheduled to cross the equator at like 2 a.m. And the captain sped up the ship early, pushed it, that first week, so that we were able to cross at, I can't remember what time it was, at 10 or 11. And, they had a big countdown up there. There was no giant red line in the ocean, much to my disappointment. It was great. And it was neat that they made an occasion out of it.
And it's a big, kind of a big celebration in the Navy for people the first time they go across the equator. So it's kind of cool to be able to see the Dizzy Wonder and the crew and the guests be able to partake in that as well.
Yeah, they had a party during the day, kind of with the ceremony, King Triton's thing, and then that night was just the general little party with the countdown as we crossed the equator. And it was a special cruise. The people we met on there were all fantastic, and that's really what made it so special. As friendships formed, and everyone was just so excited to be on cruise. And it wasn't so much about the port stops or anything else. It was just okay to be on the ship and going all the way across the world.
I don't want to dwell too much longer, but I thought Lauren said it really well, because when they first announced it, I was thinking, wow, a cruise to Australia. But really, she kind of put it in a better light. And it just sounds like you're saying the same thing, that really it wasn't a cruise to Australia, although that's was your ultimate destination. It was a cruise through the South Pacific, and kind of reframed it that way. And that kind of reframed my mind of really seeing that part of the world and kind of taking on that experience.
Yeah. And it was, all the stops were very different than what we expected, but all in good ways. They were beautiful. It's just sort of those, whether it's McHale's Navy or South Pacific Broadway show, you have all these images of these lands, and to finally actually to go through and visit them. And I mean, the people on all the islands that we stopped at were some of the nicest I've ever met on any trip. So they were all excited to see us there and very welcoming, and it was great.
I love the way you put McHale's Navy. So for all of you born in the 80s and beyond, just Google it. It was a great show back in its day. Tim kind of made that point that a lot of people are going to stay in Australia. I know that you've been to Australia, so many different things to see down there. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? As far as if you're going to take a trip that long, to be able to stay down there and see some more things. You
can't make it all the way to Australia and then just leave. So absolutely, you definitely want to see stuff. And then specifically, Sydney has so much to offer. So I really love the idea that Disney did the short escape. Obviously, you could do a whole Adventures by Disney to Australia. You could go on your own. You could book other tours. You could do a whole Australian getaway. And even with all those trips, you're not going to see it all. There's so much to do there. But I love that, with the short escape, it really touched on the highlights and let people see it in a super efficient manner.
That was exactly our thinking with booking it. It's like, okay, we're traveling across the world. What are we going to do? I still work. And so I was, having to worry about my vacation time. And between, spending a couple of days in Hawaii before, 13 nights, we only had time until we wanted to be the most efficient use out of it. I mean, a lot of people we talked with were doing a week to 2 weeks afterwards, but they were all retired, had that time available to them. It just seemed like the most efficient way to do it. And it was the first time they've been doing a full Australian Adventures by Disney for many years, but this was the first time they had actually done the short escape and was just focused on the Sydney area. And that worked out for us. I mean, all it did was leave us wanting to go back again and see more.
Some context with Australia, I think it's an 8-hour flight from the East Coast to the West Coast. So it's even farther than going across America. So you see some of the cities between Melbourne and Sydney and everything else, and you really need a lot of time to be able to see large parts of Australia. So it's 14 hours from the West Coast just to get down to Australia in and of itself. Before we jump into this, Christy, if you can, just touch a little bit on the escapes that they have. I'll talk about where they're at, but what is the idea of the escape, I think, by ABD, do you think?
So the escapes are always going right before or right after one of the cruises to the cities. So they have them for London, they have it for Rome. There's a few other locations as well. And it is doing like a deep dive in those, well, a mini deep dive, right? Because you're a couple of days. So it's the idea of they're literally connected to a cruise. You don't have to take the cruise, but if you are, they will provide you transfers to or from the ship, depending on which order you're doing it. And the dates they pick are specifically for the cruises. Even in California, they'll have the Disneyland short escape, which I kind of want to do that one, but it's only when there's a ship in California and they time up the dates to correlate with that. Yeah. So that's the point. It's to get people that are taking these cruises to do like a mini deep dive into the cities and catch all the highlights.
And as you said, there's escapes out of Barcelona, the Disneyland Resort in Southern California escape. There's one in Paris, actually, Rome, London. All of those pair up with cruises really well. And now the Sydney escape. There's one in the Amazon as well. And I think that pairs up with some of the ABD trips that go out of the Amazon now down out of South America. Tim, you kind of touched on this. Not a lot of information on these escapes. We've actually got the London one booked for this summer. How did you prepare for this, or were you able to find any information anywhere?
So, well, it initially started when they announced the cruise way back at, I think it was a D23 celebration, that they were going to be doing the first time going to Australia and doing a season out there. And they sort of half mentioned the escape on with it. And, we had been hearing rumors about the cruise line going to Australia for a while. And so I had kept my eye out on it with the idea of doing the Trans-Pacific, thinking that would be fun. And when they said the ABD, it was like, okay, we'll add that on. So we booked the cruise opening day. We were gold for when we booked it. I wasn't sure how it would sell out or if it did. And it did sell out right away, though lots of people dropped. So people were able to add on no problem later on. But I wasn't going to book the cruise without having or book the Adventures by Disney without the cruise being set.
Because Adventures by Disney deposits are non-refundable after 14 days of when you book it or when you sign that adventure agreement. Yeah. Like you can't just book it and change your mind. You can move your deposit one time, but you definitely want to make sure you're getting on the cruise before you book an adventure if you need them to correlate with each other. Just keep that in mind. You can't just book it and change it like you can with everything else.
Yeah, and that's why we were really careful about that. So we booked the cruise the first day for gold and then went to book the ABD and it was already sold out. And so they put us on a waiting list. And we'd heard that they limited to 40 people for the escape. We're thinking, all right, well, hopefully within 2 weeks, before that deposit, you can have to make up your mind. Things will happen. And seeing already on the cruise group, there were lots of people on that waiting list already. A week or two later, it came through for us and a lot of other people. What we didn't know at that particular moment is they basically doubled the capacity. Once again, this is like on how little communication there is about there. We just booked it and like, okay, cool. A few months later, we get things to sign and send in. There just isn't a lot. Obviously, this was the first time they did the escape. There isn't a lot of information out there. You've got a detailed itinerary, so you know exactly what's all going to be involved. And at least for the escape, there was no Facebook group for our escape, though everyone obviously was on the cruise group. So there was some discussion on the cruise group itself about it. We signed some things. And then from what little I gathered, we called them because my wife is gluten-free. She talked to someone there. They seemed to take the information down. She didn't get the usual warm fuzzy she does from Disney that they've got this taken care of. And then a couple of weeks right before the cruise, we got an email saying, here's our menus of that. You had to basically select all your food well in advance. And
was that for everybody or just for
that was for everybody?
Okay.
She looked like it seemed pretty confident. We made a note on the email back of our selections. And obviously, with it being only 3 nights at different restaurants, it wasn't a case of, okay, everyone just order, 40 people or however many all at once. And they prepare the food this way. They had it already. And, we made a note about her, being gluten-free on there. And that was basically the pre-cruise information we got.
You did get the email right before the trip that had a link to a little bit more information?
Yeah, right. They give, and that's actually, I called on that because one of the things they said is one 40-pound suitcase. In the information, it's like, we're going to be gone for 3 weeks. We've got 3 50-pound suitcases, not one 40 for a person. And I called, and of course they were going to say that's not irrelevant, but they did say that's more for internal flying, for like a regular escape. And it turned out to be absolutely no issue at all. We had, our luggage, they took care of it, no problem. So yeah, we did get, an email beforehand. We also got the box a month before or so with the backpack and the water bottles and all that and the pins. So that was exciting, so you do get that initial bit of rush for it.
One of the other things that I kind of noticed looking at the escapes is, and because they're so short, it does make sense compared to like your trip, Christy, and the regular ABDs, where each day, sometimes you have a choice on what you do. These are kind of like, this is what we're doing. Obviously, you don't have to do it. You could opt not to do it. But I mean, if you're going to sign up for one of these, you kind of want to do all these things. So let's jump into the escape itself, Tim. So you get off the Wonder. I believe they set up transportation then from the port to the hotel you were going to be at.
In the second week of the cruise, we got on our door one night information about saying you'll meet on the day you disembark at 6 a.m. I think it was. It was very early, or 6:30. At the Azure Lounge, be ready to go, and your escape will start right away. We got into Sydney at like 4 a.m. or some outrageous hour, and I was so excited. I was up at like 5 and walking on. Unfortunately, it was cold and rainy that particular. The weather was great for the whole trip, except for the day before. The first day in Sydney was cloudy and rainy. I was up on deck to see the city that I'd only seen pictures of. And
you took an amazing photo. I guess you did that during your ABD. But everybody needs to go to the DCL Podcast Instagram and look up the photo that Tim took from the bridge, I think. And it's gorgeous.
Yeah, that night, we'll get to that for the first at the end of it. But yeah, we were all excited about getting there. And then so we went down to Azure Lounge. Clearly, there were more than 40 people in there. So the idea that was going to be 40 was like, okay, well, this diminished the experience. A couple of days before we got to Sydney, the cruise had been so amazing. I was like, okay, the escape was almost as much, within a couple $100 of the 2-week cruise in the cost. We just had a, ocean view stateroom. And so it's like, okay, are we going to I didn't think we would regret the money, but like, all right, will it be we could have done something similar on our own for a lot less. So, I wasn't totally worried, but was like, will we really enjoy this? And then seeing, 80 people, like, okay, will this diminish the experience as well? And so we get off. We were one of the very first people off the ship, got through customs right away. We'd set our luggage out the night before, like you normally do, get through customs, picked up our luggage. They had an area set aside for us there to congregate. People got their luggage. Everyone was over there. And they had 2 buses, or they took our luggage and said, okay, you'll see it at the hotel. I was like, okay, awesome. That was one of the main reasons we had booked this. Is I didn't want to have to, I just wanted to enjoy being in Australia. I didn't want to have to worry about transportation. Are we seeing the right things? I wanted that, guided tour. They say, here, look, here's the opera house, So they took our luggage and they split us up into 2 buses. And they did tell us at the time, if you want to be with friends, be with them on this bus, because this will be your group for the rest of the time. So they essentially split us into 2 groups. Each group's had 2 guides. So we did get that personal.
So it was like the normal. Yeah.
Right. So it was, we had 2 guides for 40 people. Go off to downtown Sydney for the first. We just do a walking tour through the town. All the spots we went to, the 2 guides were fantastic. We had Suzanne and Amber. They're both from Australia. They had been doing this for years. Adventures by Disney, obviously doing all the Australia ones for a long time. And so they were great, both over a decade of doing it. So they were fantastic. But all the spots we'd have, and we would have the local guides for it. So we did a walking tour of the downtown area called The Rocks. Sydney was a great combination of history and being very, very modern. And so, we got to, they pointed out stuff and, just did this walking tour. It was raining off and on all during that. So that was the one little damper, but it was cool to see the history of this area. And then we went to Area 4 and we did a bike ride. And so we went to where the bike rental place was, and they got us all set up to go out for a bike ride up over the bridge. Actually, it was just up to the top of the bridge and back. And so that was amazing. And it was raining off and on then. The guides were great. So Sydney is a lot like San Francisco in the hills, which I had no idea about. I mean, the bike ride was no problem, but when we were walking around later, there were some really steep hills there. And I said, it reminded me a lot of San Francisco.
First off, that meeting in Azure at 6 a.m., I have this like thoughts of The Amazing Race for some reason stuck in my head. You're off. But when you guys did the tour, with 40 people, did they have like headsets so that you could hear what they were saying? Was that were you able to take in everything that they were saying?
I'm trying to remember. At the Opera House, we did. I think for that first one, we didn't there, but that wasn't a problem. It was big, wide open area, so we could all get around the people and see it. Said a lot of it was lost on me as I was just looking around at everything. Really wasn't paying as much attention to the talkers as much as there. And so did the ride over the bridge. They were really great in letting everyone know if for some reason you need to walk, stop. They had one of the guides in the back, so there was going to be no one left behind. And it was steep enough, and especially getting up to the top of the bridge, a lot of people did have to stop and walk. It was great. So
one of the things ABD is kind of known for is where they stay too. So you guys ended up after the bike ride having lunch, and then you check into the Shangri-La, Sydney. Could you talk a little bit about that? You guys stayed in one hotel, which is kind of nice. So it was kind of like being on the cruise ship. Unpack once and then see the sights.
Exactly. And this was like one of the nicest hotels or probably the nicest hotel we've ever stayed at. And that includes staying at Alani right before the cruise. This was nice in a different way. And especially after being on the Wonder for 2 weeks, suddenly to walk into our room with a giant king-size bed, huge windows out overlooking the harbor. It was quite the step up from the cruise ship rooms. And so the hotel was absolutely fantastic.
I feel like this escape is unique because you did so much in the morning before you even checked into your hotel. And the fact that you did like 2 activities and had lunch and then checked in, like most of them, you'll do like a check-in, maybe one activity, and then dinner. Not so much going on right away. They're really jamming it in. That's fantastic.
They gave us some time after check-in and before dinner. We then had free time. So we had lunch. It was very nice there. And the meals, both groups were all together. So then we were all together, and we made sure we sat with different people every time, which made it really nice. One of the big concerns I had going in was, we hear about the Adventures by Disney on these other reports about everyone's friendships they form and the close bonds. I thought, okay, in 3 days, are we really going to be able to form any sort of friendship? But the big advantage is everyone on there had just been, even though I hadn't seen or hung out with any of them on the cruise, but we all had the shared experience of 2 amazing weeks on a cruise. So we kind of already had that bonding right from the get-go. We all had something in common to talk about, like, okay, what did you do? And so it was really easy to meet and talk with people at all the different meals. And so all the meals were absolutely top-notch and fabulous. So
that dinner that night, you were up at the 36th floor looking out over Sydney. Wow.
Yeah, that might have been one of the best meals, if not the best meal we've ever had. And that includes some fancy 5-star restaurants. This was like one of the top 5 restaurants in all of Australia, they said. Got this amazing view of the harbor. And of course, so the Wonder had just gone in the night before or that morning. And then that evening, they were doing a media cruise type event just through the harbor. And so everyone was all geeked out to look down at the ship that we had been our home for 2 weeks, up against the windows as we were watching it move around. And then just to really make it over the top ridiculous, a rainbow was over the bridge. So there, onto the ship. So all the pictures from everyone from that dinner was, fabulous for both that. And then to be able to look down and see the ship all lit up at night was amazing. And, so we're overlooking the bridge and the Opera House, these, iconic images that you've seen your entire life. And, we're seeing them in person there. And it was quite the treat. And the guides then officially introduced themselves at the dinner and went over the days. And right from the get-go was like, okay, no, this expense and experience is going to be well worth it. So that was the first day. And that was a treat in itself. We didn't do anything between after we checked into the hotel and dinner that night. From getting up that early in the morning, we were tired. The guides were great in telling us where all the options where we could walk to. Everything was within fairly easy walking distance at the hotel, which was fabulous. It wasn't far to walk to it, whether a different restaurant or places to get gifts to bring back home. They made it clear. It says, listen, if you're going to be spending more than a couple $100 on anything, talk to us to make sure you're getting what you think you're getting. If you're looking for anything in particular, they were more than happy to point us out to all the different locations to get to and all that. So they made it very comfortable to explore the city. But we were so tired from the night. Our room had this beautiful bench with overlooking the harbor. Well, we didn't get to see the opera house directly from our room. So we were just happy to hang out there and relax before dinner that night. And then, of course, the dinner was fantastic that evening.
So Christy and I were kind of talking that, Adventures by Disney is one of those things that like you pay a lot for it, but you're going to get a lot packed into it. So you're going to go, and they're going to fill it up for you to see. So, having that moment like that to kind of relax a little bit is kind of few and far between. I think that's what you said on your trip as well, right, Christy? She's shaking her head. All right. Well, let's jump into day 2. It's a busy day. You're going to see Sydney and the Southern Highlands. Kind of talk about what you guys did in day 2 then, Tim.
Yeah. So they got us up fairly early in the morning, but went down to the Southern Highlands. They split us up again. It was about a 2-hour bus ride, which was great because we got out of the city and was able to really see some of the countryside. So we weren't totally within the city. They split up the buses at that point, kind of. So we did, we were all doing different things. So it wasn't 80 people congregating on a spot at once. So the first thing we did is we went to an area for canoeing. You mentioned the amazing race, and the canoeing experience is where my wife and I decided we will never do Amazing Race together, as they'd warned us beforehand that, if you've never canoed together, this will put a great strain on your relationship for that 30 minutes. And that was very true.
Kayaking and tandem bikes are kind of the same thing. So
yeah, but it was fun seeing it around. We got to go out and said, do the canoe thing. So yeah, any dreams of doing Amazing Race together were clearly proven that would not be in our best interest to do. It was kind of funny. So on the way there, the bus actually got stuck, fell into a hole, as they were sort of turning around. And we were about, 15 minutes away from where we were going to canoe. They couldn't even open the doors. So the locals in this park area came out with shovels to dig us out. Yes, it's true. And so we could get out through the doors. And then, of course, the guides were on their phones with it. So there were some shuttles coming down. We happened just to get one of the guys that helped dig us out. Then was like, they found out where we were going for doing the canoeing adventure. It was like I said, it was 10 minutes away. I said, I'll give you guys a ride. And so like us and another couple hopped in his car. His kids were playing in the playground there. He goes, oh, they're good kids. They'll be fine. And just took us out, where the canoeing was. And meanwhile, they were dealing with it. They assured us everything would be fine. And somehow they did get the bus out. So when we were done with the canoeing, we were able to get out. But that was like this whole, the friendliness of the Sydney people and the Australian people was totally evident. And said, just people randomly came up and helped us dig out so they could open the doors because the front left wheel had fallen into this giant hole. And so they couldn't open the doors. And so, we were like, okay, we're going to have to be climbing through windows or something. Like, nope. And, I know the guides were on their phones and doing everything, but we're totally professional and everything, no problem. We had the same bus driver to take us back, and he was fine. But it was quite that was sort of just seeing how the Sydney people came there was kind of a fun initial part.
What a great story there. So from canoeing, where'd you guys head after that?
So then we went to an alpaca farm, and this is something I would never, of course, booked on my own. It was a sheep and family that ran it. It was sort of like someone straight out of central casting in Hollywood saying, we need an Australian rancher. And here he was, and he was charming, and we got to, walk around with alpacas, and they told us about the history. His wife then ran one of the local restaurants in this little tourist town, and they said, "Oh yeah, you'll be meeting her. She's getting lunch all ready for you up there." So it was just one of those experiences that you have never done on your own. I'm not going to say, tell everyone, "Oh, you have to do this," but it was a great time. And so then we went to this little town after seeing the alpacas, and he gave the history of a lot of the ranching there in the highlands. And then we went to this little town to have lunch, and it was this amazing little charming place. They brought us out platters of food that we had already ordered, and it was great. They had the place closed down for us. When other tourists came up to get some lunch, she was at the door saying, "No, you have to come back in 2 hours. We're closed for Disney people today." And obviously taking great pride in doing that. And I know that is something they do with the full-blown Adventures by Disney, is they visit that farm and that restaurant there. So they were well experienced with this. And so that was a great little treat as well. And after that, then we went it was in the Fitzroy's Falls, which was like a national park in Australia. And we were there an hour or so for a walk around. The falls were beautiful. It was great to see them. And so we were able to catch a little bit more of the natural beauty outside of Sydney as well.
I love the idea that you get to see the city, but also to see some of the country too, because we've all seen cities, and each city is unique in and of itself, but Australia is just such a different place. And I'm glad that they added that to the adventure. Oh yeah, definitely. It really did. The one drawback, and the guides did say later they would, for future ones when it changes, is we actually saw no animals. The other bus did see some kangaroos. Ours didn't. And, so not to be able to, but there was no promise of that coming into it. And so even walking around in the national park, there, they said, it's not like platypuses are running around, freely, but well, Perry's busy usually. He's after Doofenshmirtz looking for him, so it's tough to find those platypuses. And when we went to Australia, my dad and I did a bike ride, and we didn't see anything. Well, that's not true. We saw some koalas. We never saw any kangaroos until we got the very last day, and we went by a golf course, and there was like a million kangaroos on this golf course for some reason. So, so that would have been the only thing that was really lacking, was not being able to see any animals. We got back late in the afternoon after the wonderful day out there. And that was the only evening that we knew we had dinner on our own. And so, and actually it was the only meal we would be having on our own. We had breakfast every morning at the hotel. It was up in the same restaurant at the very top of the hotel, overlooking everything. It was a fabulous breakfast each day, full buffet, not having to make your own waffles at the Best Western.
Tim, did they feed your wife well?
Yes. I mean, she's gluten-free and no problem with that. So every meal we had out there, we pick up our name. They would have a little name tag. And then on one side, our front side was our name, and on the back side was what we had ordered. And they had marked GF on that for her being gluten-free. It was as good as the Disney cruise or anything else.
Okay, cool.
With it. So they really no problem accommodating her as well.
So where did you decide to go for dinner that night?
So that night, I thought, okay, we're in Australia, and they pointed out, I'd like to go to a pub. And they pointed out a couple, well within walking of the hotel. Walked down and here's the other advantage, once again, before the guides were great saying, okay, in Australia, you don't tip. If you usually, for like in a pub, you'll order at the bar, then go back to a table, and then they'll bring you your food and you'll pay up front. If you want to round up to the nearest dollar, cool, but there is no tipping for meals. So they had briefed us on how to,
that's important.
It really is. And so that made it very comfortable to go out for that. And so we went out, I had this plan for a walk down there. This was the Saturday before Halloween. And Halloween isn't a big deal in Australia, but I think it's kind of ramping up a little bit. And so, there were a lot there, not that it wasn't like being a big city in America on a Saturday before Halloween where it'll be absolutely crazy with people in costumes. There were a few you could see around there, but, we were able to, we ordered at the pub and went to our table. Just like the guide said, the bartenders could tell we weren't local. And helped us out with, made sure got what we wanted. I got a beer, we got a table. So my wife ordered a gluten-free pizza, and used to United States, those gluten-free pizzas being very small, it's the standard one. So she ordered, as big as you can. And it was like one of the best pizzas she's ever had. It was huge. We had ordered wings as well, not knowing how much food we were going to get. So we had all this food. The table next to us, obviously from us talking, they had, overheard it. Was a guy who happened to be from Utah, but had married a woman from Sydney and was visiting there with his, was hanging out with his brother-in-law. So we got talking with them. We shared food with them just because we had ordered more than we could have. They had rugby on the TV, New Zealand versus Australia in rugby. So, just seemed so appropriate to be, enjoying a beer at an Australian pub, watching rugby on TV. And so that turned out to be a really special evening as well. Adventures by Disney had nothing to do with it, but they kind of made such an experience possible by giving us these options. And when we left it, knowing what to do, exactly what to expect. So we could just enjoy the evening. So that was a lot of fun.
That's an amazing touch to be in a city like that and have, just kind of that, some good information of where to go and that type of stuff. So just another real benefit of traveling with Adventures by Disney. So on to the last day, boy, a packed day in Sydney, being able to see all the highlights. You start off with a jet boat ride. Talk about this last day, Tim.
Yeah, so the last day, obviously, you're gearing up for being in Sydney and the Opera House and all that. So, you knew this was going to be a biggie. And so we did a jet boat ride in there, and that was like so much fun. I think, looked up later, it was like 50 or 60 miles an hour, doing 180 degrees, so splashing. We didn't get soaking wet in there. They were, they kind of let us know that it was going to be a mild version. They weren't going to be going all out like they often do. And, each boat had like 20, 30 people in it. So, they were big boats, but riding through the harbor next to the bridge and the Opera House, rock music playing and just flying around. It was like 30 minutes. It was like so much fun. My wife's comment afterwards was her face hurt from laughing and smiling so hard. And it really was like, something that I'll remember my entire life doing it. And once again, something that I was doing going on my own. I was like, oh, that looks like fun. Maybe, how much does it cost? So glad we got to do that. And it was a blast there. Everyone had a good time with that. And then we walking through like the Botanic Gardens, had lunch out. They gave us a little bit time on our own, not that much. Basically, we were able to walk back to the hotel ourselves and, enjoy a little bit of the gardens and some of the scenery of Sydney afterwards. And then we did the Opera House that evening or that late that afternoon. And so the Opera House is something I'm comparing it to, I got 15 years ago for work. I had to go to India for a few weeks and they took me to the Taj Mahal. And I liken the Opera House to that, this structure you've seen your entire life in pictures and movies, and then to actually see it in person, it's even more amazing. So, and my comment to everyone was, and our first thought upon seeing it when we arrived is like, it's tan, almost brown. It's not white. The way the tiles are on it, and, on the tour, they even, talked about how they had like two different tiles because initially it was going to be white, but then they realized in the reflective heat of the Australian sun would become a, beam of death during the summer. And it's weird. So I look at all my pictures of the Opera House afterwards and it looks white, but to the naked eye, it's brown, it's tan, almost brown. But it was just totally amazing. And, it was a tour with the headphones, and it was a standard tour that they've got available there to do it, but it was great. There was in the main hall, there was no one performing that day, so we were able to take pictures. They warned us ahead of time. If there's any rehearsals or any actors or singers there would be no pictures, but there was nothing. And, to say, something that I never dreamed I would be able to do in my lifetime would be to be in the Opera House and inside. It was very emotional and really moving. And then we had our farewell dinner at the Opera House area that they had set up for us. And once again, it was a lot of fun, and to spend the time with this group of people that even if you were with them directly, we'd all done, these, now almost 3 weeks together, a shared experience. And we felt like we were in the minority as so many were still going on and going to New Zealand or whatever afterwards. There were a couple of us that were flying out the next day. They had all that arranged as well. And so that's what I was forgot to mention on the first day when we loaded the luggage onto the cars. So when we get to our room, the luggage was there waiting for us inside the room. So we didn't even have to bring it up the stairs. They took care of all that. We had given them all our flight information. So they said, okay, we've got a shuttle for you at such and such time based on this flight. All that taken care of. Really can't say enough, how easy it made it. And that's exactly what we were looking for. Maybe if I was, my 20s, would want to Rick Steves it and, explore it, on our own. But here, I just liked we liked and appreciated a guided tour with all the details taken care of.
So you discussed that the trip was almost the same price as the cruise. Do you feel like you got value out of this trip?
Yes, I'm so glad we did that. It really, even though pricey, but what we got out of it, there's absolutely no regrets, and saying how much they packed in. And despite how much they packed in, it wasn't exhausting or anything. They gave us enough time on our own, relax or explore on our own if we so wanted to. And so it actually, yeah, I mean, I'm a convert. I would, if you'd asked me, a couple of years ago, I would put Adventures by Disney in the same category as Sailing Concierge. Oh, it sounds nice, but it's something we'll never do. Well, now we've done Adventures by Disney, and especially tacking it on at the end, was the cherry on the top of this amazing trip. I think that's the one advantage of doing it at the end versus the beginning, like they do in some other ones, is meeting of the interaction with the people was so easy because we all had that, shared experience of being on the ship together for 13 nights, even if we weren't directly hanging out together. We said, "Oh, did you see this?" Or, "Oh, what did you think of the Marvel show? Wasn't it amazing?" And, we all, could all talk about that. So there were some really good friendships even formed just on those short 3 days.
It really surprises me that more of these trip reports you do with Adventures by Disney, but not just Adventures by Disney, because we had kind of I don't want to talk about us, but we met a family on the way to the beach in Tortola and just had a great time talking with them for 45 minutes. And then the next thing you know, everywhere we went on the ship, we kept running into them. So the curiosity of people that travel with Disney, and especially Adventures by Disney. And I know that Christy's going to talk about it because she kind of told about the group that started off as 5 of you. And then by the end, it was a huge table on your river cruise. I love the fact that even was just a 3-day trip, and you did set it up, Tim, that you guys had that shared experience ahead of time. But I think just the natural curiosity, people that want to go out there and travel and see and experience things, makes you kind of more open to talking to each other in these groups, and it really adds to that experience, I guess. Well,
especially, when you talk about other people on outside, they go, "Oh, you're doing a Disney cruise. Is that just for kids?" There's the initial justification of why we do a Disney trip. And then, when we talk about Adventures by Disney, we have to say the only Disney part of it is the customer service. There's no characters or anything like that with it. It was just a top-notch, high-end travel group. I hope this will not be our last one, but it was really good.
Well, for those of you who are on the Trans-Pacific, either going to Sydney or leaving Sydney, there are several of these still available to be booked. So if this show piques your interest and you guys are heading down there, definitely get a hold of your travel agent, or I'm sure Christy would love to help you out with that. So many different places with the ABD. I'm just going to throw you on the spot there. Where would you want to go next with them, Tim?
I don't know. Having the add-on, and we're kind of would like to do that again to explore these, especially if it's in Europe or a place like that, to be able to explore some of these cities that you don't want to just, it's not like doing a Caribbean cruise where you fly in and fly out and, Orlando, and you're happy to want to spend the extra time. So, I mean, it's still one of those cases, looking at the sticker price of doing the full blown one. The California one sounds like fun for me, with the Disneyland aspect of it, and any of the European river cruises to be able to see. That was one of the other things for when we were sailing into New Caledonia, which was the final port stop before Sydney. That was very much like Alaska, according to the cast members there, that because the winter had just spent the summer of going by all these fjords and islands. And so one of the things we talked about is like, okay, now we're interested in Alaska for the first time. Living in Colorado, we see mountains and, these majestic things. We know Alaska's more spectacular, but, for our vacations, we would rather do, beach and, tropics. But that scenery from the ocean was a totally new perspective. And so adding some sort of land adventure on top of a Alaskan cruise would certainly be of interest.
Can't go wrong with Alaska, right, Christy?
Oh my God, it's so amazing.
Tim, I'm glad you guys just had an amazing experience. I mean, what a bucket list cruise, heading down through the South Pacific and then spending time and seeing just one of the most iconic cities in the world, Sydney, and kind of the area around it. I know that you and your wife are not people to stay home. What's next for you? Well,
this summer we're going to be doing our first time in Europe and doing a Mediterranean cruise. And I would love to add on either Barcelona at the beginning or Rome at the end in ABD, but vacation time is not going to be allowing that. So, that's the one trouble.
Have to go back.
I know that's part of the thinking for Australia. When we booked it was like, we'll probably never go back. Now, maybe after, there's so much more we need to see there. Europe, we're going to say, okay, we'll definitely go back to that as well. And so that's really our next summer will be our big trip there. And then, in a year from now, doing one of the early treasure cruises. Yeah. And then, a lot to look forward to. And we'll see what everyone's work out.
People wondering about Adventures by Disney, they don't have a castaway club like Disney Cruise Line necessarily does. But once you have booked it, then you become an inside adventure. Is that what it's called?
Insiders.
Adventure Insider or something like that. Yeah. Where you're able to book ahead of time. So I'm not sure if that would have helped you or not as far as the cruise this time, as far as booking the ABD.
They do have a count because sometimes there's they'll open up things like if you had more than 3 or 5 or something adventures, then you can do something sooner than other people. And then there's also a really cool pin you get for your future adventures now. That'll count down or count up the adventures that you've been on.
Which is pretty special too. So beyond Adventures by Disney, Disney has partnered with Nat Geo. So there's some Nat Geo adventures. And if you're looking for a little bit more, maybe a cheaper alternative to really see things and get some, one-on-one guides through different places, I always push Adventures by Christy. That is probably one of the better adventures that we were on over in Naples one time too. So also look for the Adventures by Christy if you happen to be traveling with her.
There's always going to be a wrong turn. Something's going to go not quite right.
Somebody's going to be yelling at you on a train. Some crazy woman. But before we get out of here, Tim, once again, thank you so much for all you've done for the podcast over the years, and thank you so much for coming back on here. But I want to give a shout out to you because you are a member of the 501st. If anybody is a Star Wars fan, they know who the 501st is. I know that you get a lot of pleasure out of it just because you're a Star Wars fan, but I know that your group does some amazing things for, kids in hospitals and things like that. I was just wondering if you'd talk a little bit about being part of the 501st.
Yeah, the 501st is the Star Wars costuming and community. The 501st is for the Empire side of things. You have the Rebel Legion for people that have rebellion costumes. So I've got a full original trilogy Stormtrooper, and you have to build to get in. You have to make your own costume and have it be screen accurate. That they help you. That you're kind of vetted to get in, but there is plenty of help when you're building your costume the first time. I've gotten to do everything from sporting events to we do Toys for Tots for this Christmas, and it is international. There's groups on every continent except for Antarctica, and I'm sure there's been people that have trooped down there in their costumes. And I've done anything, as I said, from sporting events, Toys for Tots, got to be on stage with Weird Al, the whole gamut of opportunities with it. And so it's kind of fun. And it's just like the Disney cruise community or the Disney overall fan community. It is a community that then gives you something to do and share with. And
well, I know that you guys do a lot of really amazing things for kids, and I've seen the pictures over the years, whether it's helping out at the hospitals and stuff. I know one of the people I work with is part of it. He's down in the Bay Area, and I've heard some of the moments that he's been able to have and connect with other people. If people want to be part or find out more about the 501st, how can they do that?
Look up on the website and get in touch with your local garrison, and they'll help you out in building your first costume. You can do anything from a simple officer that isn't too expensive to, a full-blown Vader will set you back a couple $1,000s.
Perfect. Well, Christy, I know thanks for being such a trooper today. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Thank you guys for doing this with me. Sorry that I had no voice. It really wasn't this bad. Then the day went on and it just gone. So sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all. Thanks for being such a trooper to do it. And Tim, any final thoughts for you as far as like somebody going on this for the first time or just overall this trip?
It really was a fantastic experience, whether you're doing Sydney to Honolulu or Honolulu to Sydney. It's one that it is a big time commitment. If I had known going into it, the amount taken into account of travel and plane flights and all that, it was a lot more than I expected, and maybe would have had second thoughts if I'd known everything going into it. But so glad we did it. And it's a unique, something a little bit more original than saying you've done another, Eastern Caribbean.
Well, thanks, Tim. I just got off in Eastern Caribbean. That's all we I'm just kidding.
Hey, I'm excited for our, Eastern one we're going to be doing on the Treasure in a year from now. So, you do it. It's not that those are great, but yeah, this one was something extra special. And to be obviously doing it as the inaugural one. And for the Adventures by Disney escape part of it, I know the guys were great about asking us for feedback because they're going to try to make that better. It was the first time for them for doing just the short Sydney escape. And so they were definitely taking notes on what they could do better in the future for that.
Don't put the bus in a hole.
That would be up there. As I said, it would be nice to have seen animals, but it wasn't promised going into it. And so, there's nothing I would have traded differently. Really, it was something that we'll definitely be remembering for the rest of our lives.
Well, I'm glad you guys get to do that. And thanks a lot for laughing at my smart alecky sense of humor. No matter what trip you go on, it's always special to be out there traveling. But boy, what a bucket list to be able to do what you guys did. And I'm so happy for you that you guys get to do it. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences today, Tim. And we are into 2024. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts as you get back from Europe. First time, boy, that's another bucket list trip, which I just hope that you guys have a wonderful time on.
Yeah, we're excited about that. It's one of those. That's the trouble with the Disney cruises. Suddenly, you think you do one and I've experienced it. Then you look up and seeing another opportunity of wouldn't that be a nice place to go and see? And they're really offering a lot more itineraries than 10 years ago.
I'll throw this out there just to kind of just to kind of keep that thought is I've never really thought about the adventure, the great big huge ship that's going to Singapore, but I met 3 or 4 different cast members that are from that area on our latest sailing. And they're like so excited for that ship because they're like, it takes me 3 days to get all the way down here to Port Canaveral, but it's going to take me like 3 hours to get back to my homeland there. And they cannot wait for that ship. And I was like, you know what? They kind of talked me into it, man. I'm excited about that. You're right, Tim. There's just like between Adventures by Disney, Disney Cruise Line, everything else, there's like so many different places that just keep opening up and for us to all go out there and explore. So
you never needed to be talked into it. You've been excited about that ship since they came out with it.
Okay, maybe I was, but it made me more excited. How's that? And to see those, like in the back of the Fantasy where they've got like in the Dream where they've got like all the different ships. And to see the Wonder down there in Australia, it was like, wow, that is so bizarre to see that. It's just super exciting. So I guess we'll leave it with that. Thank you once again, Tim, for so much your support. Thanks for coming on and sharing your experiences. And we look forward to having you back on when you get back from the Mediterranean this summer.
Okay, great. And thanks for you guys and the great shows that has only fueled, my interest and desire to do different things.
Well, all the best to you and your family. And we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming back and taking a listen.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show. Once again, we want to thank Tim for coming on and sharing his Adventures by Disney Shore Escape in Sydney, Australia. If you're enjoying the show, we greatly appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We would also like to thank our patrons who make this show happen each and every week for us. You too can help support the show by visiting patreon.com/DCL Podcast. Whether you're boarding a cruise, enjoying a trip to the parks, or adventuring outside of Disney, on behalf of myself, Christy, and Steve, we want to wish you smooth sailing and safe travels, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.
The DCL Podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.